Hi everyone, I'm Ed Amoroso from Tag Cyber. I'm here with my friend Michael Oldham, who is the CEO of PortSys, cybersecurity company located up in Massachusetts. And Michael, welcome to the discussion.
Thanks very much, Ed. Pleasure to be here.
I'm going to ask you a bunch of questions about zero trust and access, but before we get in, why don't you take a minute and just share with us a little bit about what you guys do?
Sure. So what we basically do is we provide a security solution that helps organizations to consolidate access control for their organization. So providing control over access to resources wherever they happen to be, whether they're local or cloud, and providing them in a way that allows them to get access from any device, from any location, but according to the security policies that the organization wants to use. The idea behind it is that our solution is very easy to deploy for organizations within their existing infrastructure. So it's not a rip and replace, it's something that can actually migrate over time to allow organizations to match the pace of change that their organization's able to handle. And that's just in real summary what we do, that we provide that kind of technology that helps customers to really simplify and strengthen their existing security infrastructure, and at the same time make it much easier for their end users.
That sure does sound nice, and I know you and I both, when we were starting our careers, it wasn't like that at all.
Oh no, not at all. It's been a long time in coming.
But tell us how you got into this. I know you have a lot of experience, both as a practitioner in IT, and you've had a nice opportunity to build some perspective. What got you into this? What sort of prompted the company?
Well, I've been in IT and business operations for many years, and I think one of the things that I looked at over my career is that the end users very often put to the side in many cases for security in particular. But it's been this way in IT in general. It was always an afterthought. And trying to build a security infrastructure that both meets the needs of the end user as well as the organization seemed to be kind of lost. So along the way, I've been involved with a number of different technologies and security companies and run IT in a number of different organizations myself. And looking at those various different things brought me to understand that there are better ways that we could do this. So I really got involved from, in the case of PortSys, with looking at the technologies that existed from some of the major companies that I used to work with, and really saying that a lot of these technologies were based on security technologies might have been 20 or 30 years old or more. And they grew by acquisition and created essentially a Frankenstein of different pieces to try to create solutions to the current problems. And so we decided to sit down and look at this and really kind of start from the ground up, start from scratch and look at it to address the problem for today and tomorrow, rather than starting from problems that existed in the past. And it's taken a long time for me to get to this point and learning along the way, but all the steps in my career with various organizations and companies that I've been involved in or started really had led me to this point.
Has it been your experience that traditionally discussions with IT teams tended to be a little different than the discussions with security teams? Has that been something, and are you bridging that gap a little bit? Because it always seems to me like they're very different kind of engagements between like IT operations and then security. What have you seen there? Is it getting better?
Well, I think it's getting better. I think it's really not even just the IT and the security teams, which are different in the way that they've looked at things. In fact, before there weren't even really security teams, it was just an IT team. But now what's happened is there's been a shift, and I think part of the shift is the fact that the business now has the power. In the past, when we looked at IT security was the department that said, no, you can't do that. And that's a problem from a business perspective. When you start thinking about that, you can't have an organization within your own organization that's trying to put a brake on everything. So what's happened with the shift over the last number of years is that the users and the business of the organization has actually taken the front seat again. And so now it's been the job of the organization, of the IT and the security organizations, to support that mission. It's a little bit different, but you still have to have security, so you can't ignore the security side of things. You need to have security to be able to allow the organization to move forward, but it's about managing risk and understanding and putting in place the right things for the organization to move forward.
That business influence, is that what we would refer to as digital transformation? Is that kind of the result of that, the business
Well,
stepping in and saying, hey, we got to do this right?
yeah, I think it's what's happened is IT security has actually taken a position of being able to be the engine that can help to drive digital transformation. Because I think if you can't do it securely, the organization and everybody inside starts saying, well, if we can't do it securely, how can we move forward with this? When you find ways to be able to do things securely in a way that matches what the business needs, it changes everything. And that's where, IT security is really taking a leadership position within the business side of things on ways to be able to enable the business to do new things or things that they couldn't do before. And I think that's really important.
Now, I want you to talk a little bit about Zero Trust, because let's get into the platform and what you guys do, because I know Zero Trust is a primary driver in the total access control solution that you guys have. Help some of the folks watching maybe understand what this Zero Trust concept is and what prompted you guys to build out the access controls that you've got embedded in the platform.
Yeah, so I think Zero Trust is an interesting terminology. It's pretty accurate, but it's a nebulous term for lots of people today. Unfortunately, it's become kind of the catch-all marketing phrase for most of the security products that are out there. And I think last count, I had seen almost 100 different security providers claiming Zero Trust solutions. Obviously, they're not all doing the same things. So we look at it very differently. Zero Trust itself, at the root, really says, always trust, never verify, right? That's really the whole point to Zero Trust. But you could say that I'm asking for a username and password, so I must be doing Zero Trust because I'm verifying that that user is there. Well, the reality is that's not the case. If you're looking to change the way security works, you're not going to go along with the same thing that we've always done. So the way we look at Zero Trust is a little bit different. The idea is that you want to take Zero Trust as a concept to mean that you're going to protect all of the assets that you're trying to get, that you're trying to protect in your organization, the applications and the infrastructure itself, create segmentation between those from a security perspective so that if somebody's coming into your infrastructure, they're not just automatically connecting to all of their application resources without any kind of validation between the end user getting into the network and the application resources themselves, whether they exist locally or in the cloud. And so Zero Trust is really changing the control points that you have for what you're looking to find out about that user and the context of that user, which is also really important. A lot of people look at the user as the primary way to identify somebody. So that was the old username and password. The problem is username and password can vary quite a bit as far as the controls go. If you have a username and password and you're sitting in a competitor's office and you're signing into your organization to spill all the secrets of what your organization is doing, that's not very good. So the context of access becomes very important when you start looking at it from a security perspective. And if you can take the context of access along with strong validation of credentials, which means the username, password, maybe even getting rid of passwords and using KCD or other kinds of technology, adding in multi-factor authentications, device validation, and lots of other things, that you can ensure that that person up front is who they say they are, and that their context matches the situation that you want. You tie that together with policy control over each and every resource, whatever that resource happens to be, that can differentiate by that individual resource. Some could be higher security than others. When you start tying this all together, what you end up with is a dynamic access control infrastructure that allows you to be able to dynamically control who gets access to what. And as you start bringing more of your users into this kind of solution, you end up with great reporting because you've got centralized reporting over who got access to what throughout your entire infrastructure.
What's been your observation? You mentioned these different attributes that you use for making access policy decisions. Do you see them moving more toward maybe away from passwords toward things that are more multi-factor, adaptive, maybe a variety of different attributes to determine, whether Michael is really Michael trying to access the network? Do you see those attributes becoming more, maybe more varied, more dynamic, more powerful?
I think the username and password still isn't dead. So it's still being used, and it's used in most organizations. But I think people are used to that. So from an end user perspective, it's still pretty straightforward and easy. People are used to using that.
Yeah, it's interoperable, that's for sure, right?
Right, absolutely. So, but the change that I'm seeing, and what we've been seeing over the last couple of years in particular, is adding more factors of authentication. So adding multi-factor authentication, looking at device validation, looking at geo-IP address validation, and other things that are important. And many of these things can be looked at, and what we do is we take a look at this behind the scenes. The end user doesn't have to be prompted or do anything other than put in their normal credentials and maybe a multi-factor authentication. But everything behind that is done transparent to the end user. So you get a lot more validation of who they are without interrupting the process significantly.
So in addition to kind of controlling, you mentioned policy and respecting policy, help me understand kind of the visibility implication here, because I would think that would be pretty important, like having some a better situational awareness of what's happening and what devices are accessing what. Is that part of the platform? Is that visibility component? Is that something you guys do?
Yeah, absolutely. And that's a critical part of this, because, you know, if you think about it from an existing organization, if you wanted to run a single report that told you who got access to what throughout your entire organization, most organizations couldn't do it. They couldn't even come close. The only ones that come somewhat close are ones that bought another product that consolidates all the logs from the existing products to try to create some kind of central reporting. It's getting to the point that it's actually kind of crazy that we've got so much technology that we're throwing into this, and so much
product soup, right?
Absolutely. And that's one of the biggest challenges that organizations are facing. What we do is we actually, because as you start bringing more and more control over access through one central point, you now have the ability to do centralized reporting, and not just reporting about you know, who is signing in or whatever else, but it's detail about who's signing in, what device they're coming in from, what location they're coming in from, the security status of the device, you know, how they're accessing or what they're accessing, what they could get access to with their security, you know, and the policies that they've triggered as to what they could get access to and what they won't get access to. So all of that together is going to change the way organizations are looking at control, because today each different product may have a different level of control over the resources that they're getting access to. And that's a real problem because there's no consistency. And that's really what we're doing with Total Access Control, is really trying to build that platform together so that as the organization moves more and more their resources into Total Access Control, they get a better and better picture of what's happening within their organization, local and cloud. Because the cloud is also another complication when you think of it from that perspective. How do you know who's getting access to the cloud? If it's a direct connection from your end user who's sitting at home today and connecting in, is that going to be logged into your security reports? With Total Access Control, it will be. You'll know who's getting access to even the cloud resources. And you can control those as well with different ways of adding in authentication for the cloud, which is also important. So let's say you had a cloud that didn't have multi-factor authentication, or it had one, but it wasn't the one that you like to use in your organization. Total Access Control allows you to select what you want to use to validate your end users when they're getting access to information.
So cloud is the app hosting part of the equation. What about the device side, like with unmanaged devices or things that might be a little less accurately inventoried? What happens when unmanaged stuff hits your platform? How do you guys handle that?
Well, it's actually really important because we have lots of customers who have people bringing their own devices and they're at home or they're doing whatever else. So what Total Access Control does is that it's really dependent on the policies the organization wants to set for that. So there are a couple of different ways that you can handle it. One is that you could look at the security status of that device. You could take a look at how that device works or what the profile is at that particular time. Are they running antivirus? Is it current? Is it up to a current operating system, et cetera? And you could make a decision based on that if you wanted to, as to whether to let that device connect to resources inside. And each of those different resources may have a policy that says whether a device like that could or may not be allowed access. So let's say it was an administrator function or something high security. You may not allow that BYOD device to connect to that particular resource, even if the user had the right credentials. But perhaps on other things that weren't as high security, like email or other kinds of things, you may want to have access to those things. So it could be variable based on that device. The other thing that we can do is you can actually take the device dependence away with technologies having total access control so that you can get access to, for example, an RDP desktop or some kind of a virtual desktop without the need to be able to see anything about that end user, but still control the security on what they could get access to. And we can do that completely clientless as well, if you wanted to be able to do that without any dependency on anything, even from something like a Chromebook, where you could get access to an application only through something like RDP app, which will only give you access to a single application. So how you decide from an organization perspective, we want to give the organization the control to determine from a security perspective what's acceptable and what's not, and we'll allow the organization to do whatever they need to do in those respects.
Good to see you referencing RDP. That's been such a security scourge for so many companies. Now, what's been the feedback you get from like the audit and compliance community? I would imagine they must be pretty enthusiastic because this is right smack dab in the wheelhouse of most audit teams. This is the kind of thing they like to focus on. Have you had much interaction with that community?
Yeah, absolutely. In fact, you know, the fact that they can get access to the information about who's getting access to what is kind of a, you know, a great moment for them, because they look at it and say, now I can actually track down what's going on. It's not that I have to go to 16 different products and chase 8 different people to try to find an answer to something. They can look at it and actually get the information. But there were a few quirky things that came out of it, or, you know, some pretty significant things that I was a little surprised by. One customer came back and said, look, we actually used this to prove to a large software vendor that we actually we didn't need to license everybody in our company for this product, because we can now prove who actually used it. So they're able to go back and actually renegotiate their licenses and save a considerable amount of money, just because they could actually now prove who got access to that particular resource. Wow. And it changed the, you know, the whole nature of their conversation.
Well, that makes the whole product and platform purchase pretty accretive, right?
For them,
that's pretty good.
For itself many times over with just that one negotiation.
That's a heck of a good use case. So, hey, listen, why don't you put your crystal ball on the table here a little bit and help us give a peek into the next year. We're filming this at the beginning of 2021, but what do you see coming in the next year or two? And we have to make sure we're accurate here, because if somebody watches this down the road, they'll know how we're doing here. But what do you see? Zero trust, I assume that's going to continue. That's a train that's out of the station. What are some thoughts in the next year or two?
Yeah, well, I think the driving factor is that people are still getting hacked, and that's not going to really change. And one of the basic reasons behind this is that organizations today are still too complex with too many different products. They have too many different attack points, too much from a resource perspective that they have to manage to keep up with it all. And even if vendors are prompt in patching, if you don't patch your product timely, or nobody finds it for a while, you're still at risk. So once somebody gets inside, one of the biggest challenges that I see is that we still have that old castle and moat approach for many organizations, where once you get inside the infrastructure, you're able to connect, and a hacker can pivot and attack all kinds of resources. And it doesn't matter which way you actually get in. There have been a lot of very high profile breaches recently. They found a novel way to be able to breach a bunch of different organizations, but once they're inside, it's really the same kind of an attack. You can pivot, attack, ransomware, do whatever you want, exfiltrate data, or just lie in wait until something opportunistic comes along while you're monitoring what's going on in that infrastructure. So that's not changed yet. As organizations start to realize how significant of a problem this is, I think they're going to start to really embrace what's happening around the zero trust movement, because they'll start to understand the difference. You know, a lot of people, when they look at security, they kind of say, well, I haven't been hacked, so I must be secure. It's not really the proper way to look at it from a security perspective. You have to look at your infrastructure and see what the possible attack vectors could be within your infrastructure. And, you know, the reality is today, with a lot of people and organizations and the increase in mobility, there's going to be a lot more attack surface for many organizations. The use of VPNs has increased tremendously, and we're going to see that continuing in the future. Organizations, because of the recent pandemics and things that we've looked at, we're not going back to the way it was. So we're going to still have a lot of these attack surfaces, and until we start to shore these up and actually shrink those attack surfaces, close external ports to the outside world, and get rid of technologies that are suspect, or at least bring them behind a wall that makes it much more secure and controls that access, we're going to continue to see these breaches. So I think Zero Trust and other technologies will start to, that are focused on trying to control that and bring things back under control. We'll see a lot of adaptation for organizations in that way.
That's a very sensible view. I agree 100%. Now, let me ask you, for some of the viewers who might want to learn more about the platform, is the website a good place for them to schedule a brief and get to know a little bit about your platform? Would that be the best place to turn?
Yeah, absolutely. www.portsys.com. And it's actually, most of the information that you'd be looking for is there. You can schedule a conversation, demonstration or something like that with any of our team if you're interested in that. And that's probably the best place to start. We do have a lot of materials that people can read. If they're interested in that, I'd be more than happy to share that with you.
That's great. Well, listen, on behalf of my team and for the folks watching, I really want to thank you. That was very clear and very enjoyable discussion. You have a nice way of taking these complex topics and making them seem very straightforward. It was really a delight to listen to you. And I want to thank you for making some time.
Thanks very much, Ed. Really appreciate it. Thanks for making the time for us.
And for everyone else, we'll see you next time.